was telling Daddy that I stayed up, or actually, I started to say stayed up last night, but I actually stayed up to 4:05 this morning. I looked at the clock when I went to bed. So I hope this makes sense to y'all. I've been working on it for like 3 days, but anyway, it made sense at 4 o'clock this morning. It might not right now. We'll see. But so I'm gonna start with a couple of questions. How many of y'all have ever messed up and sinned? How many of you have messed up more than once? How about several times? I got one for you now. How many of you have messed up repeating the exact same sin again?
Yes.
All right. Yep, me too. I don't know about y'all, but when I do that, the devil loves to tell me that I'm never going to get it right.
Yep.
He tells me I'll never get it right. What's the use in even trying? You might as well give up. Has he ever said anything like that to y'all to try to discourage you?
He still feels
Me too. So today's lesson then is for many of us, it looks like. We're covering one of the most significant passages of the Old Testament today, Genesis chapter 22. Y'all probably already know which one I'm talking about just because I said what I said, but very familiar story of a test that tries everything within Abraham. So starting in verses 1 through 8, Genesis 22 verses 1 through 8, and y'all know I'm talking about the story of Abraham and Isaac, right? That's one we're talking about. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, "Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. Then God said, "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you." Early the next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship and then we will come back to you." Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the 2 of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, "Father?" "Yes, my son," Abraham replied. "The fire and the wood are here," Isaac said, "but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the 2 of them went on together. So how old do y'all think Isaac is at this point?
Seemed like he was about 13.
maybe 12.
Yep. So he's old enough to carry wood on his back, right? Old enough to carry wood. Significantly, the same word, boy, that's used for Isaac in verses 5 and 12, it was the same exact word used for Ishmael when he was a teenager. So they do think that he was very likely a teenager. Definitely big enough and strong enough to have fought back if he wanted to. Especially considering Abraham's like over 100 now. So, you know what I mean? So something to keep in mind. That's almost squealing, this mic is. You want to turn it down?
I don't hear it squealing, yep. Do?
Okay, so Isaac was Abraham's only son because of Ishmael's departure, like some 14 to 16 years earlier, back in Genesis 21. And I didn't cover that story, but there's a story of Hagar and Ishmael being sent away. So Abraham's only son because Ishmael is gone at this point. So teenager Isaac has been Abraham's laughter, y'all know why I'm using the word laughter, right? Has been his laughter for a decade and a half. And as the child of promise, everything was focused on Isaac. Abraham loved him with an aching parental love, like the kind that hurts, and y'all parents probably know what I'm talking about. Right, Ashton? We've talked about that. Like, it's rewarding, but it's the hardest thing you'll ever do. You know, it hurts a lot, but it's a very deep love.
Hold on a minute, Brad. I don't know if no means no, it's not squealing now, or no, that's not good yet.
I still hear it.
Okay.
I could probably turn it off since Granny ain't
That's
here.
all.
You want me to just turn
Go
it
ahead.
off?
No, go ahead.
Well, it's still making a noise, a buzzing. So it's real easy to read Genesis 22, I think, with a complacent attitude. And I think it's easy to remove ourselves and not think about the pain that Abraham had to be feeling. Because it was a 3-day journey. Can you imagine, like, 3 days, all that going through your mind of what was about to take place? So it's easy to not empathize with the pain that Abraham felt because we're so familiar with the story. And it can take away from his act of obedience, because it was an act of obedience in light of extreme emotional pain and stress that he was going through. The announcement in the opening line of chapter 22 tells us that God was testing Abraham. I'm just going to turn it off.
I must be deaf.
Kinda. All right. So, that first line tells us that God was testing Abraham. So we get to know that it was never God's actual intention for a child to be sacrificed, because we know it was going to be a test. But Abraham did not know that. So he was going through extreme pressure and stress during that. Sometimes handing our children over to God causes us to feel a separation or distance, like we're letting them go, even though if they may be right there, but just, the mental part of it, it's like we're letting them go, and you can feel like a separation and a distance, which we don't like. Remember, I was telling y'all a couple of weeks ago that I was praying and magnifying God, and it had occurred to me that God was the creator of all. He is the creator of all. And everything's His. That nothing's ours. We're just stewards. Like, I'm not mine. Ashton's not mine. Ashton's not Brad's. Brad's not mine. She belongs to God. And I think it's easier for us to hand things over when we realize that they're not ours in the first place. Everything belongs to God. Genesis 22:1 reads, "Sometime later, God tested Abraham." So this is a test. That's good. I mean, that helps us to digest the story, because a lot of people are put off by this story. Like, why would God even ask him to do that? Why would He want him to do that? But He knew ahead of time that it was a test, and He knew exactly what Abraham was going to do. So it was a test. The Hebrew word for tested means to test, try, or prove, carrying the idea of testing the quality of someone or something through stressful circumstances. And we can see that portrayed pretty well in 1 Peter chapter 1, 6 and 7. It says, "In all this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you may have had to suffer grief and all kinds of trials. These have come so that the proven genuineness of your faith, of greater worth than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire, may result in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed." So if you're going through some stressful circumstances right now, guess what? Your quality is being tested. Your quality is being tested. He's burning the fake faith right out of us. That's what's happening. Burning that fake faith right out of us.
And I read something this week, I think it was this week, that said when you're being tested, the teacher is always quiet.
Yeah, I've seen that before. During the test, the teacher's always quiet. That's right. So when he's proving us, he already knows how it's going to turn out. He's all knowing. He knows how it's going to turn out. He knows what we're going to do. He knew that what was in Abraham at that point, and he knew that Abraham was going to pass the test. It's us that doesn't know what's in us. It's us that doesn't know. Sometimes we find strength that we never knew we had. Anybody ever said, Lord, you can't let that happen to me because I just can't take it? You know, I've said that before, you know. But sometimes we don't know the strength that we actually have until we face it. And sometimes we find the opposite, weaker than we thought we were. That fake faith. We thought we had genuine faith when really it was weak, weaker than it should be. Look at the place that God told them to go in verse 2. He says, go to the region of Moriah. Many scholars believe the possible meaning for Moriah is, my teacher is Yah. My teacher is Yah. And I'm sure y'all can hear God's name Yahweh in that. But my teacher is Yah. God is about to take Abraham on a field trip. The field trip of his life. And sometimes you have to leave the classroom. There are many, many things that that can be learned and accomplished by studying God's word and responding obediently to it in the first place, like in the classroom, the easy way, like if I would only have minded what they told me and listened to it, the first time in the class, the classroom, so to speak, the easy way. But many times I had to go on a field trip and learn it the hard way. You know what I mean? So some things you just got to go on a field trip to learn. Y'all remember all the questions I asked y'all at the beginning, right? Like we made it to many of us repeating, cycling through that same sin or mistakes. Many of us failed the test before we passed it. That's what we did. I have failed the test over and over before I've passed them before. So you may not pass the test the first go around. It might take you 2 or 5 or 10. I'd be embarrassed to tell you some of the number of tries that it took me before finally passing some. Do y'all remember the story of Abraham in Egypt when he acts like Sarah is his sister to the Pharaoh in Genesis chapter 12? Y'all remember that? Well, I was reading along in my studies a few weeks back, and I made it to Genesis chapter 20. So this is Genesis 12. Now here I am, Genesis 20, and it reads, Abraham moved into the region of the Negev and lived between Kadesh and Shur. For a while he stayed in Gerar, and there Abraham said of his wife Sarah, she is my sister. Can y'all believe that? I mean, when I read that, I was so disgusted with Abraham.
Maybe Sarah was too.
I imagine so too, and God. But when I read that, I was like, you gotta be kidding me. I mean, I really was thinking like, really? You didn't learn? I can't believe you didn't learn it the first time. How stupid can you be? I mean, I was really rough on Abraham. And I lost a lot of respect for him when I read that, because this is supposed to be like, the faith, Hall of Famer here. He's a Hall of Famer, right? So I began to wonder, like, why on earth would God even allow that story to be in there in the first place? Because it made Abraham look bad. I mean, and he had already told nearly the exact same story. So why waste the space? Because there's not much. I mean, if you consider all that's you know, how big the Bible is, it's nothing compared to what could have went in there. There's so much had to be left out. So why waste the space on the exact same story? Then it hit me, or God hit me upside the head, either one. And I realized the beauty of it. Abraham did commit the exact same old sin. And that's what made it special. That's why it was special. We get to see that Abraham failed the test again. He did it. He failed the test again. Abraham's clinging sin, when pressured, was to trust himself rather than God. Always trying to help God. He trusted himself rather than God. A guy named Oswald Chambers wrote, God can achieve his purpose either through the absence of human power or resources or the abandonment of reliance on them. So either you don't got them at all or you've got to abandon your reliance on them. And that's what I've got to do.
And he did it because he feared for his life.
Yeah.
So it was because of fear.
Lack of faith.
Yeah.
Yeah, because fear, opposite of faith, right?
Yeah.
So he feared for his life, not having faith that God would take care of him and provide. Right. So Abraham had to learn to trust God alone. Don't trust in himself or anybody else. Abraham had to learn to trust God alone. And God was working to that end. That's what he was working on. And unfortunately, that sounds very familiar to me in my life. I don't know about y'all, because I told y'all my whole story. By the way, I forgot I left out that I had to jump my car off before we left for that trip too. So right off the bat, my car wasn't cranked. So anyway, but back to that, I am definitely learning to trust God alone. Not Brandy, but God. As we know, it's never again recorded that Abraham entangled in that same old sin, and his life increasingly became one of a deep dependence on God. And that results in that ultimate display of faith that we find in chapter 22. And Abraham knocks this test out of the park, making a A+. He probably had bonus points even. Might even made more than 100, but he knocks this one out of the park. But I didn't want y'all to miss that. Before he knocked this one out of the park, he failed a few before. And God was always increasing his faith and blessings coming to him before he got to this point. So we might have questioned Abraham's character at times, or I did. But this story, the story of Abraham and Isaac, I can respect a faith like that. Anybody can respect a faith like that. Exodus 20:20, Moses said to the people, "Don't be afraid. God has come to test you." Anybody else be like, I'm going to be afraid when God comes to test me. But don't be afraid. God has come to test you. And then it says, to keep you from sinning. He's come to test you to keep you from sinning. And here's what God did with me. He knew that I kept repeating that cycle over and over. He knew I did. But God basically said, I'm coming after this one, Brandy. You're gonna stop it. We're not letting this one go until you deal with it and you fix this and you make an A. And I just kept blowing the test and blowing the test and blowing the test. And he just kept working on me until my grade, so to speak, improved every time. So God can keep giving you the test until you pass. He don't promise it, but he's done that with me a lot. And he will not accept anything but an A on that test. He's not going to accept anything less. Anything less than that gives the devil a foothold. So if you don't come all the way to the line, that's standard. You're giving the devil a foothold. That's what's happening. So we've got to break that cycle once and for all. Remember, the enemy will keep that memory of a failed test fresh on your mind to discourage you. But if you're having some of those same problems of that cycle, remember, it's not over yet. It ain't over. Our teacher is Yah, and he's patient, thankfully. I can't tell you how thankful I am that he hadn't give up on me. Because I tell you, I gave up on Abraham after he did it something 2 times, you know. And I just can't, I'm so thankful that he hadn't give up on me. Unfortunately, our hardest tests usually involve what we love the most. God moves that whole chapter of Genesis 22 in slow motion. So we can feel like every bit of it. I already told you, like, there's not much that's put in the Bible of what happened. So anything that's in there that's given, you know, pen and paper to, it's significant. So in this chapter, great lengths go to describing stuff and kind of dragging it out, so to speak. And a lot of ink and paper devoted to it, but like sentences like, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, like really trying to like get you to feel it so that you understand what was happening there. So you know how hard this test was for Abraham, and you associate with those feelings that he must have been feeling. And then it says, and go to the region of Moriah. If you look back in Genesis 12, where Abraham has heard the words go to before, it's the exact same Hebrew word in both places. And it's not a coincidence. Go to, in Genesis 12, the Lord said to Abram, leave your country, leave your people, leave your father's household. Because God's testing the call of obedience. And the same thing is happening in chapter 22. God testing the call of obedience. Take your son, your only son Isaac, the son of the promise, whom you love. And do y'all remember what the name Isaac means? Laughter. I knew I could count on you, Alice. You was a good student in school, I bet. All right, laughter. Isaac was the heart of Sarah and Abraham's laughter. He brought them joy and laughter and happiness. The Hebrew word for love means to love, desire, to delight. They delighted in Isaac. They delighted in Isaac. That word love in Hebrew implies a strong emotional attachment for and a desire to possess or be in the presence of the object of love. And I try to explain that concept to Ashton when I force her out of her bedroom and make her come sit in the family room with us. She's like, why can't I just stay in here? I'm like, I just want to be in your presence. If you'll just sit there, you don't even have to talk to me. But we do, we just want to be in the presence, right? Y'all, are you laughing because you relate? You know how you kids want to separate, but we want to. Ashley's like, yeah. So keep that in mind when we think about Abraham's mindset, because he's been given this assignment by God to take his son, his only son Isaac, whom he loves deeply. And God asks something of us at times that's incomprehensible. He'll ask things that's incomprehensible and urges us to believe that he can be trusted. He'll ask us something that just seems unfathomable, like, I can't do that. I can't do that. Just to get us to believe that he can be trusted. Look at verses 7 and 8. Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, Father? Yes, my son, Abraham replied. The fire and the wood are here, Isaac said, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Abraham answered, God himself will provide. God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. And the two of them went on together. If we back up to verse 5, it reads that Abraham said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship and then we will come back to you." He says, "We will come back to you." Does anybody know how Abraham reasoned that after offering Isaac as a burnt sacrifice, that they would return together to the servants? Faith, yep. In Hebrews 11, 17 through 19, not 9, 19, says, "By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, 'It's through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned.' Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead. And so, in a matter of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death." Abraham absolutely believed God's promise. God had done promised that all the descendants would come through Isaac. So how could he stay dead? That's how he reckoned it. That's how he reasoned through that. He thought, well, if I do this, you're going to have to raise him from the dead because, you done promised this other thing. So he absolutely believed God's promise without question that Isaac would carry that bloodline. So he reasoned that God would have to raise Isaac from the dead. And this is actually the first time that anybody's ever even thought anything about resurrection. And y'all know this story relates so much to God and, Jesus. So a lot of it. We might cover that. I don't know. I hadn't decided. But anyway, so he read
God said it, Abraham believed it, but I'm pretty sure Sarah would might question.
I'm pretty sure that's why he didn't ask Sarah.
That's why he got up so early that morning.
To avoid Sarah. Pretty sure
he rose up early,
Yeah. Yeah, there's a reason God didn't mention this to Sarah. Definitely. Genesis 22, 10 through 14 says, "Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, 'Abraham, Abraham.' 'Here I am,' he replied." And don't y'all know that was the quickest obedience ever? Like, yes. What do you need? I'm pretty sure that was some quick obedience. But he said, "Here I am," he replied. "Do not lay a hand on the boy," he said. "Don't do anything to him. Now that I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." Abraham looked up, and there in a thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide." The Lord will provide. Abraham's initial declaration to Isaac up in verse 8, when he first told him God himself will provide, when he said, "Where's the lamb?" And Abraham says, "God himself will provide," had now been fulfilled more perfectly than he could have ever dreamed, because he thought he was going to have to do it in resurrection, so more perfectly than he had even imagined. Abraham's declaration of faith, God will provide, as he and Isaac went up to sacrifice, had now become the story's end. We see that the God who tests is also the God who provides. The God who tests is also the God who provides. The tester is the provider. Both truths are actual fact, but they gotta be connected by faith. By faith. So when God tests you, he will provide for you. Maybe you can't do it. It is unfathomable, and you can't do it on your own. But you ain't on your own. God will provide.
Amen.
As God tests our faith, it's stretched and it grows. Here, Abraham's faith was going to be stretched to the utter limit. And because he held firm, his faith has become the grand faith example in all of history. But don't forget that this test, came after substantial spiritual growth and blessing. What we need to see about God is as we go through these tests of growing a greater faith, as God tests us and stretches us and our faith grows and we believe and He provides, we see from this that the way to increase faith is to exercise faith. The way to increase faith is to exercise faith. So when we are called to give our Isaacs, those things that are most precious to us, we need to understand when we do it that God is Jehovah Jireh. God provides. God provides. Any questions? That's all for that lesson. And I've taught on this story probably more than once, but this was a little bit different spin on it, focusing on those tests. Any questions, comments? Yep. All right, we'll take 5 minutes then and start worship service.